Australia Post has been delivering across this wide brown land for generations. But the tale of this country began with the original storytellers long, long ago. For 65,000 years, this continent has been home to hundreds of nations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They are the custodians of the land, water and sky that surrounds us, with a connection to country that has never waned. For millennia, they have passed down language, culture and traditions through song, dance and story, connecting the past with the future. Today, we pay respect to elders past, present and future and recognise the contribution of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We hear their voice and look to work towards a more reconciled future. Together, we learn and share the story of this country.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Australia Post's Business Talks webinar. I'm Gary Starr, Executive General Manager of Parcel Post and eCommerce Services here at Australia Post. Now, before we begin, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and pay my respects to elders past and present. The theme of today's webinar is Going Global. It's fair to say that the global environment right now is anything but predictable. We're seeing ongoing geopolitical tension, shifting trade dynamics and economic uncertainty playing out in real time, and often in ways that few would have expected even 12 months ago. For Australian businesses, particularly those looking to expand internationally, that creates both complexity and opportunity, but it can also make it difficult to know where to focus. That's exactly why we've chosen this theme for today's session. This webinar is designed to cut through the noise, bringing together leading experts and Australian businesses who are navigating this landscape every day to provide clear, practical insights on how to grow beyond Australia. Through the session, you'll hear from trade experts, insight leaders and brands who have successfully expanded into global markets, and they will share what's changing, how they are approaching that change, and hopefully stimulate some ideas for your business. Now, we'll also be running a live Q&A at the end of the session, so I encourage you to submit your answers throughout, your questions throughout, I should say, via the Q&A widget, which you can find in your webinar console. Now, we'll aim to get through as many questions as we can. So that sets the scene. Let's get into our first discussion. There's no shortage of headlines right now about global uncertainty, geopolitics, inflation, and shifting trade dynamics. But for businesses, the real question is, what does this actually mean for demand and for growth? Because what we're seeing is that while the environment is complex, opportunity hasn't disappeared. It's just become harder to read and harder to win. So today we're going to unpack both sides of that. What's happening at the macro level and how that's actually showing up in customer behaviour. Joining me in the room is Dr. Paul Grimes, the CEO of Austrade. And joining us remotely is McKenna Ralston, the CEO of CommBank IQ. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Gary.
Now, Paul, I'm going to start with you, the first question. So what are the 2 to 3 biggest macro forces shaping global e-commerce right now?
Yeah, Gary, I think you actually covered it in the way you framed the session. You know, the 3 big ones that I would call out is, first of all, macroeconomic factors, geopolitical factors, and then technology. And all 3 relate to each other. On geopolitical factors, the tectonic plates are shifting. The global geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting, and that's having significant implications for supply chains. Supply chains are being disrupted, they're adjusting, they're being remade as we speak right now. So it's a time of great change. We know when tectonic plates move, a lot of action happens, and that's exactly what we're seeing in the world. Of course, what's happening macroeconomically is completely related to that as well. So that we're seeing the macroeconomic effects of those geopolitical tectonic plates clashing together, and very starkly at the moment, the impacts that that's having on energy prices and how that flows right through the economy. And of course, you called it out, that impacts on consumers. You know, consumers are not immune. In fact, they're feeling these effects really directly now, and that's having real implications for the competitive environment. And then overlaying it all, of course, is we've got this really profound technological change, particularly driven by AI, not just AI, robotics and other areas where we're seeing quite stunning changes. But I think for top of mind for everyone on this webinar today will be the impacts of AI and how that's shaping the business landscape.
Okay, so that's I guess that's a perfect storm almost.
It's almost a perfect storm.
Yes.
It creates great challenge, but also opportunity.
And McKenna, I guess I'll throw to you. From a data perspective, are you seeing these same forces show up in how consumers are then actually spending?
Thanks, Gary. And well, we are going global today. It is important to keep an eye on what's happening here in Australia. Our strength in CommBank IQ is a deep understanding of the Australian consumers through banking transaction data. So what we're looking at here is not surveys, not samples of behavior, but the actual spending of 7 million Australians, which we aggregate to be nationally representative. And what we're seeing in that data is that consumer spending is remaining relatively resilient overall. Total spending is holding up for the moment. We are not seeing a broad-based pullback at this stage. So, for example, total retail spending is up about 5% year on year. That's not channel specific. But importantly, it's also been stable in the last month or so with all of these changing circumstances. So we saw that total retail sales growth across March up 5.1% year on year. So yes, customers are spending more on the likes of fuel. That was 16% up year on year in March. But the increased spend on essentials is not yet materially displacing discretionary spending. So what we're seeing is a hold, but that could change over time.
Really interesting, the difference between what we read in the media about consumer sentiment, but what they're actually doing. That's very interesting. Okay, Paul, I may throw back to you then. So certainly Australia Post feels this in terms of trade policy and particularly tariffs, and they just seem to be becoming more complex again. I just saw in the US Postal Service again talking about changes that the administration's looking at for postal deliveries. So what are the sort of key changes businesses need to understand when they're thinking about entering a new market as they think about the trade policy and tariffs?
Yeah, in the current environment, business has to be constantly surveying and monitoring what's changing in the trading rules environment for their business. And it doesn't seem that a week goes by where there isn't another major headline, some other development in the world that business is going to have to grapple with. Of course, one of the key things that we are responsible for at Austrade, the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, is making sure that there's good information available for businesses to navigate through this complex and changing environment, whether it be the trade rules themselves or indeed implications for our freight and logistics services as well.
And so I'm sure a lot to consider, and I guess with the pace of change, you're having to keep that for a smaller business, keeping across that, Austrade can help in terms of staying right up on what's changing day to day. But where do businesses typically become unstuck when they're navigating international expansion in the environment we're in right now?
One of the key ways that you can become unstuck is not keeping abreast of developments. And look, it's completely understandable that a small business might not be able to dedicate a lot of time every day to monitoring everything that's happening. That's why it's important to be reaching out for partners who might be able to help you and advisors that can help you and navigate through this environment. You come unstuck if you're not actively looking and monitoring the developments in the markets that you're participating in.
It's interesting, there was a little bit of complexity when those what people refer to as the Trump tariffs came in, and some of even the tech changes for businesses here to start shipping to the US again, and some product getting returned as they first set up. So it just changes so rapidly. So with that in mind, how should business think about products in the markets they go after? So I'm a business, that thinking about expanding globally, and I'm sure one answer would be to talk to Austrade, but how do they think about just how I prioritise which markets I'd go after.
So I think prioritise a market where you feel that your game is well matched to your capabilities and your understanding of that market. For every business, it'll be a different answer, of course, but best to be focused on those markets where you have an understanding of the market. You can be confident that you're going to be able to monitor and stay abreast of changes, and more importantly, that you've got a product that is going to satisfy the needs of that market.
Okay, great. And I guess also that's Austrade is there to help.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, well, I'll turn to McKenna now. So McKenna, as I said, it's interesting reading the media narrative of slowdown, but what you just said earlier, the data suggests something a little more nuanced. So what are you actually seeing in the consumer spending right now?
Yeah, there sure is that narrative, but as I said earlier, whilst we're seeing general resilience in the Australian spending overall, we are seeing lower growth rates in selected discretionary categories. So, for example, people are starting to pull back on bulk and home categories, and we're also seeing some downward movement in travel-related categories, which makes sense, particularly airlines. So airlines were down 6.5% year on year in March this year compared to last year. But that trend is not occurring across the total volume of spend in the whole wallet yet. But what we are seeing across the wallet is a change in how people spend. And most importantly, that's a continued shift towards online behavior. Online spending reached $82.6 billion in sales last retail. That accounts of 24% of total spending. So the demand is absolutely there, but we are seeing smaller, more frequent online purchases, and consumers are spreading their spend across more retailers. So now there's almost 16 retailers per household in the spending behavior. And that means it's likely driven by discount-led buying, by shifts to private label, and use of subscription benefits. And that tells us that while people aren't spending less overall, they are being more deliberate in how they spend, how they allocate those decisions. So whilst there's no overall slowdown story yet, there's absolutely shifts that's happening in behavior, and particularly to and within the online channel.
So if that's the case and demand is still there, but it sounds like harder to win, what does that mean for how you think businesses need to show up differently?
Absolutely. Well, I think let's start with the punchline, right? There is still strong demand, but it's distributed. If consumers are shopping more frequently across more retailers, that means there are more opportunities to win that transaction, but there's also more competition every time a customer makes a decision. And we're seeing timing play a bigger role. Spend is increasingly concentrated around key moments that matter, particularly promotional periods, Black Friday, Christmas sales, etc. But it's important to also remember that not all customers are shopping the same, and brands very much need to consider how do they shape their strategy for different generations, different locations. So, for example, in the AusPost report, we could see that millennials contributed the most spend online last year out of all the generations. That's nearly 30 billion. And it's not just about the age range, it's also about where the shopper is based that needs to be considered. So yes, consumers in capital cities accounted for 75% plus of all online spend last year, but nearly 10% or 7 billion of total online spend came from consumers in outer regional or remote areas. And those remote customers grew their online spend more year on year than those in the capital cities. So consumers, whether they're regional or otherwise, they are looking for the best price and they are looking for a more convenient shopping experience. And it's important to note that pure online marketplaces, Amazon, Temu, etc., they contributed 23% of total online spending in 2025. That's 18.9 billion. And that underscores their value proposition in a digital growing Australia. Competitive pricing, vast product assortment, one-stop shop. So the challenge for businesses here are not just generating demand, but showing up at the right time, in the right place, and making it the most convenient shopping experience possible.
Right, that's really interesting. So it sounds like on the one hand, we've got increasing global complexity, and it's just moving at a rate of knots. And the other, a customer who's still spending, but just being far more deliberate. So look, I'd love to bring that together. And a final question to you both, and I'll start with you, Paul. So if you're an Australian business looking to expand in the next 6 to 12 months, what's the first thing you should be doing right now?
First thing is make sure that you've properly assessed your readiness to enter into markets and maintain those markets. But I would say from an Austrade perspective, go to the Go Global Toolkit. It's a fantastic web resource for all businesses, and it's a great entry point to understand what are the current rules that are applying to different markets around the world.
And that's sort of global, around the world.
It's around the world, and also it gives you those contact points. If you need further advice, you need to reach out for further advice, it gives you that link point into further advice. So the Go Global Toolkit, that's the one to remember, and the great place to start at.
And on that, I know for when I talk to small businesses, it's a bit of a black hole. And so starting with the Go Global Toolkit, at least trying to decipher where I may start, because it's just so hard to know when you're starting from scratch.
That's exactly right. You've got to find that entry point, that connection point, and also other resources are there and other points of contact, including contacting Austrade directly.
Great.
And we can then link you in with the appropriate trade specialists.
Fantastic. Okay, and McKenna, the same question to you, just around what should you be doing, and then if you're looking to expand, where would you go? What's the first thing you'd be doing, suggesting?
I just think it is so critical for business leaders to really understand how demand is showing up for their consumers in their markets. Strong expansion or strategic choices, they need to be grounded in real demand signals. As we've talked about, it is noisy out there in terms of the sentiment or the feeling that we all have. But you need to make sure your assumptions or perceived ideas about market opportunity are grounded in a real understanding of customer. And you do that through data. I know I'm biased on that, but when the world is shifting so fast and there are different signals that might be real or perceived, you really need to turn to the data to understand what is happening right now with your customers. How is that changing or not changing? And base those big, important strategic decisions in the real data, in real behavior. And that's what we bring to life at CommBank IQ. But I think now more than ever, there's opportunity out there, but it needs to be grounded in fact.
Great. Well, thank you. And I have to say, just as I mentioned earlier, the sentiment out there versus the data, there does seem to be a bit of a gap at the moment, because suggesting that demand is still there. It's just where is it and how do I chase it down? So look, I think thank you both. I think the key takeaway from today's discussion is this: that demand hasn't disappeared. It's just being redistributed. And what we're seeing is a more deliberate, more selective customer and a more complex global operating environment. So for Australian businesses, hopefully who've joined us today, that means success internationally isn't just about where you go, but how well you understand both the external landscape and what's really happening with your customers. So a big thank you to Dr. Paul Grimes and to McKenna Ralston for sharing such valuable insights today. I really appreciate your time and perspective. Now, up next, we're going to bring this to life with a more practical lens, looking at how Australian brands are actually expanding globally across different channels and what's working on the ground. We'll be back shortly, so stick around.
I'm Leah, and I am the founder of a global swimwear label, Lalea Swim, founded in Australia, in Perth, in my mum's spare bedroom. Now we ship worldwide. The vision for Lalea came from the tropics and the 80s, and knowing that it is always summer somewhere. So in that sense, we've been able to grow the business, go global, and run a powerhouse from Perth. Everyone wants to grow their business, but you have to learn a lot fast. The MyPost business app has helped me greatly shipping internationally. It's a very user-friendly platform. So you just log in, type the country you want to send to. It'll prompt you with what tariff codes you might need, importer codes, the costing it's gonna take per weight. Everything's there, and if you do need further assistance, I called my local post office, Jag always helps me out, or there is online services and you can contact Australia Post, and everyone's always really willing to help you. Since growing Lalea globally, we now ship over 40% of our orders internationally. As soon as Australian summer ends, we're sending the exact same amount to the US customers. So the other thing that is really cool about Australia Post and shipping internationally is that the more you ship, the more you save. So we've been able to get up to band 5 through shipping lots through Australia Post. And now the savings are there's no other carrier service that can compare. How does it feel knowing that Lalea is so global? It feels incredible. It is an out-of-body experience. I am very proud of myself. Having friends all over the world show me pictures. Lalea's been spotted here, Lalea's been spotted there. So pretty amazing.
Welcome back to our Going Global panel discussion. When Australian businesses think about going global, the conversation often starts with which country do I expand into and which channel do I use to get there? Direct to customer, retail or marketplaces. What we are increasingly seeing is that success isn't about choosing one. It's about building a strong digital foundation, it's about developing brand awareness, and it's about layering channels strategically over time. It's also about knowing when to pivot. So today, we're going to focus less on theory and more about what actually works in practice when scaling internationally. Today, I'm joined by two e-commerce leaders who have been paving the way for their brands internationally. First, I have Clementine Bashevsky, founder and CEO of Salt Lab, a wellness brand focused on high-grade magnesium products. Salt Lab has successfully expanded internationally through the direct-to-consumer channel. I also have Alison Trang, e-commerce manager at Leo Lin, a women's ready-to-wear fashion label based out of Sydney. Leo Lin has broken into markets internationally, including the US, with pop-up sites in New York in partnership with Bloomingdale. Two incredible careers, and it's no wonder they're not one, but two featured in this year's Top 50 People in E-commerce, presented by Australia Post and Inside Retail. Now, throughout the panel, we're going to explore different approaches businesses consider when they're scaling internationally, and we'll see that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Clementine, let's start with you. Can you describe your international growth journey at Salt Lab?
Yeah, absolutely. So Salt Lab expanded internationally in the exact same manner that we were already doing very successfully in Australia. So we were predominantly direct to consumer, 95%, and we got to a point where we wanted to just test the waters. So we actually just created a global Facebook campaign, and we wanted the algorithm to show us where the traction was. The US naturally picked up very quickly, and within 30 days, doing it that way allowed us to really lean in. We were able to test the product to market fit and scale really rapidly.
So you went down the path of direct-to-customer, replicating what you did in Australia. What do you think that channel unlocked for you internationally that others potentially wouldn't or didn't?
Yeah, for us, direct-to-consumer was what we knew. We had the infrastructure set up for that. We had the warehouse was set up. They could just add a US or an international label. So we were able to open up our total addressable market really seamlessly without the challenges that going into retail faced. I think direct-to-consumer and advertising on Facebook opened up retail organically for us because people were seeing our marketing. So we were able to open up a market that we hadn't tapped into, expand our database and customer market really seamlessly.
Now, Salt Lab is what you'd probably call a small business with a relatively small team. Is there anything you can share about the biggest complexities or challenges that you've had to face when expanding globally? And for those small, medium businesses listening today, any advice you can give them when thinking about growing internationally?
Yeah, I think naturally the fears around how do I do this? How do I know it's going to work? You know, as a small business, when we expanded, we had a marketing team of 2 and a warehouse of 3. For us, it was more about doing what we were already doing with the team that we had. And then we brought on external temporary staff for the warehouse to meet the demand there. We were able to then test the product to market fit before we overinvested. We didn't need to sit on an investment of stock on the water. We didn't need to bring on a big marketing team. We were able to really duplicate what we had done well in Australia to test the market through Meta and then just bring in temporary staff to fill the demand of the orders.
And grow gradually over time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what's really clear is that the direct-to-consumer or direct-to-customer model gives you control, but it also requires that you build demand almost market by market. Alison, I might actually start with the same question that I asked Clementine. Can you share with us the growth journey of Leo Lin?
Yeah, so we're kind of the opposite of what Clementine had. We started wholesale first. So we launched international wholesale around November 2022. And our first collection was with Moda Operandi and Neiman Marcus, who are still really great partners with us to this day. And what we noticed really early on were our retailers weren't just buying into the product, they were buying into the brand, which sounds a bit cliche, but I think it was really clear last year. We did an activation with Bloomingdale's. We took over 5 of their windows in their New York City storefronts, and we did an activation inside for our spring-summer collection. And we do exclusives with other retailers as well. And we could see the pace at which wholesale was growing at, and we knew that e-com was just around the corner. And Sure enough, it was. Last year in January, we really saw US e-com take off. And that was due to, I mean, we had a lot of strategic implementations that we did beforehand, but we had a really strong collection. We'd also launched into some of our key accounts. And yeah, we saw that take off. And then, like many other businesses, we had the tariffs in March and April, and we had to pivot our strategy really quickly to maintain that momentum. But we're really fortunate that those strategies have paid off. And now we flipped in the last 12 months from being an Australian-led business to an international-led business.
I'm sure those tariffs gave quite a few businesses challenges over the past 12 months.
Yeah.
Now, you're the e-commerce manager at Leo Lynn. What role did e-commerce and digital strategy play in driving your growth internationally?
Yeah, so in terms of our strategy last year, I mean, the tariffs really expedited a lot of what we had planned for international growth. We were very fortunate that the year prior we'd already engaged with our key stakeholders in anticipation of what the tariffs might bring. And so we had discussions with our ERP partners, our web dev agency. We'd engage with the warehouse that our wholesale accounts were in to see if they could take us on from an e-com capacity. And yeah, we just got all our ducks in a row to understand from a project perspective what that would look like. And for us from e-com, we implemented a staged approach. We did a complete website restructure where we isolated the US on its own so that we could really direct implementations where those strategies would affect only the US and no other market. We had a US warehouse migration, and we flipped our site during the stock transit to a pre-order model so that we could maintain momentum. And we've also been able to drive improved customer experience because we can now offer next day delivery, we can offer exchanges, which we hadn't previously. And then we wrapped that up with a full website retheme where we wanted to improve the user experience, we wanted to improve the site performance and continue to drive international growth.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot over the past 12 weeks, but an enormous amount achieved. Of those digital strategies and channels that you have delivered, are there any that stand out specifically as being the ones that produce the best results for you globally?
Yeah, I mean, the website restructure definitely, that really allowed us to isolate the US and implement specific strategies. We could really see what was performing well and what wasn't performing well in the US. And for us, learning more about the buying behaviour as our market was growing was really key in those strategies. And yeah, we've been able to really target that.
One challenge many businesses face is trying to decide when is the right time to scale, but also when's the wrong time to scale. Are there any particular signals or metrics that you look out for that help to tell you whether the market is worth further investment? And then on the flip side, what do you look out for to tell you that it's not the right time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a commercials perspective, understanding what is driving revenue, what is driving traffic, and like Clementine, testing those markets as well from a paid perspective, seeing what channel, in terms of your channel attribution, what are the channels that are driving traffic and what's driving conversion, and can you put some paid behind that to start testing and look at your ROAS, look at your cost of sales, look at your new customer acquisition costs and see if you can maintain efficiency like that. I think also on the flip side, looking from a logistics lens as well, how much is it costing you to get your product into that market? What are the costs of duties for us? Unfortunately, we've had to turn off several markets because of the cost of duties and it just wasn't viable. But I think working in digital, you can be very agile in that sense, and hopefully those duties come down and we can start shipping to those markets again. But yeah, I think obviously looking from a commercial lens and a channel attribution, but you still have to maintain viability in that market as well.
And being willing to pivot is also something that's really important by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we might end with a rapid fire question for you both, which is what is next for you internationally? Clementine, I might start with yourself. Yeah. What are your top priorities as you think forward to the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So the US is our biggest opportunity market at the moment. And I think what we are realising is the US demographics shop very differently to Australia. And once you have launched, like we've now launched on TikTok Shop in Amazon and Nordstrom, Erewhon. So we've got the balance of direct to consumer with TikTok Shop, Amazon and all these other channels. And we're really trying to zoom out and look at how that works holistically, because the US shopper, you know, they use TikTok Shop as a search engine, then they repurchase from Amazon, and it's so you're spending money in Facebook and it's not that direct correlation that you are used to seeing. So it's a very different model. So for us, we're really trying to understand that journey and that user experience and buying behaviour, and then double down.
So understanding the market specifically that you're trying to scale into is really important.
Absolutely.
Alison, how about yourself? If you fast forward to the next 6 to 12 months, what are the top priorities for Leah Lynn?
I mean, we're kind of similar in the sense that our US market in the last 12 to 18 months has grown so rapidly, and we're still learning about that buying behaviour. We're learning about what channels is really driving that for us. And I think in the next 6 to 12 months, it's really still continuing to optimise those channels, learning more about our customer behaviour, but also looking at our emerging markets as well. We've got a few on our radar and looking at how we can drive growth in those markets as well.
So big things planned for the next 6 to 12 months by the sounds of things for both Salt Lab and Leah Lynn. Well, Clementine and Alison, thank you both so much for your insights today. It's clear that international growth isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Your experiences and your learnings prove that Australian e-commerce businesses really need to consider the right digital strategy and the right channel when entering into new markets. Thank you again for joining us today. Alison and Clementine are going to stick around for a live Q&A, so make sure you're in the Slido button below, submitting your questions, which I'll be answering over the next half an hour or so. Now, a few weeks ago, Jordan Burke, who is the founder and CEO of Tomorrow, joined us from the US to celebrate the launch of Australia Post's e-commerce report. While Jordan was in town, Gary sat down with him to discuss strategies defining the international advantage in 2026. Now, let's take a look.
I'm delighted to welcome back Jordan Burke, the founder and CEO of Tomorrow, a leading retail digital consultancy that consults to many of the large retailers around the world. Jordan is a veteran of the industry, having spent 20 years working in and around digital omni-channel, spent a long time in China working with Walmart and really creating innovative relationships with Tencent and JD and really changing the face of omni-channel in China. Jordan's also been recognised by Walmart in a range of ways, the Sam Walton Award, but also represented the Omnichannel Forum for the organisation. It's great to have you back in Australia, Jordan. Look forward to the discussion.
Gary, this is the best time of the year.
Well, let's get into it. You were in Australia this time last year, and we spoke about the drivers influencing e-commerce. When you look at global retail in 2026, what feels fundamentally different compared to what we spoke about last year?
Gary, we're in the most dynamic moment that retail and e-commerce has faced in the last 20 years. Of course, there's the AIification of our industry. There's the role that content is increasingly playing in connecting with consumers and informing LLMs. There's speed. We've never been a faster industry. But I think if you look at the last 12 months, the marketplace segment has had the biggest leap forward. Why? In the last 12 months, Gary, the trust that consumers have in marketplaces has changed more than we've seen historically. And now customers are trusting third-party items on marketplaces as much as they do first-party items, which makes the marketplace today the most attractive, dominant format, not just in e-commerce, but in retail.
Now, I know you're talking probably at this stage globally, but I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on Australia as a market. It's often described as both advanced but isolated, and there are some unique structural things about Australian retail and e-commerce compared to the US, so and Europe and Asia, in fact. So just your perspective on that.
Gary, I think to be honest, we would say that Australia's e-commerce market is moving from isolated to advanced. Historically, it's been a market that hasn't been as dynamic. You haven't had as much global competition, and local competitors haven't been as aggressive in creating amazing world-class e-commerce experiences. That era is done. We are fully immersed in a highly competitive, highly dynamic moment for Australian e-commerce. You can obviously see Amazon, Temu, and Shein are invested and are creating standards for customer experiences that are higher than any local players have seen historically. Your local retail leaders are responding and leaning in and investing. They know they've got to close the gap with those global peers. And so we're in the most competitive moment that we've seen in probably 20 years, we think, in Australian retail. And it's an amazing time for consumers. It's a critical time for retailers. It's an essential time for AusPost to lean in and to help retailers be more competitive. So it's a unique moment.
Now, you're saying this is being driven by marketplaces, but looking across the markets you know well, how do you see the marketplace landscape here in Australia sort of evolving over the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, clearly you're saying it has to change.
It does. We need to remember marketplaces in Australia are still far smaller as a share of e-commerce than they are globally. You're seeing a marketplace penetration of about 25% of Australian e-commerce. The global average, Gary, is 65%. So there is an enormous room for growth in marketplaces in Australia, and we see all the marketplaces leaning in to drive that growth. One of the biggest disruptive factors that you're seeing is speed from Amazon. Amazon is committed to rolling out its same day or faster playbook that's worked so well in the US and Canada and UK. That is just going to make shopping on a marketplace like Amazon so much more convenient, and it's going to elevate standards across consumer segments across the country. Marketplaces, whether they be international or local, are going to have to keep up, or they're going to start to lose relevance.
And I'm assuming when you say keep up, not necessarily taking Amazon head on, having their own value proposition?
It's a great question. I think if you're a broadline retailer and you want to retain relevance, taking on Amazon is essential. You can't avoid it because that's the position they want to own, the everything store with the most convenient proposition. But what's exciting about omnichannel retailers is the chance to differentiate. The ability to leverage your physical presence and connection with customers and communities to enable a better marketplace or better omnichannel experience is totally there. Differentiating on the products that you own and buy, sell. Your first-party assortment is an exciting way that local retailers are differentiating. But there are table stakes. You've got to be able to compete on selection, on price value, on speed, on user experience, and increasingly on the incorporation of AI in making that experience more conversational, more personalized. So this is a critical moment where retailers, yes, have to differentiate, but they've got to embrace certain table stakes that are non-negotiable.
And just on that, what does good, so for an omni-channel retailer, there are some, I assume there are some must-haves to make that, to leverage the centralized DC, distribution center, and the local store. What has to be true, for that to really play out and to be world-class or best-in-class in that?
Great question, Gary. Beyond marketplace, any omnichannel retailer that wants to win as omnichannel needs to understand how to leverage the store as well as the fulfillment center. Great e-commerce typically combines both. The fulfillment center is a wonderful solution for long tail assortment that you're not going to carry in store, assortment where turnover is lower and it's an extended assortment. It's also great where you can take that extra day in some cases to be able to deliver. You don't need an immediate on-demand experience, but the store is essential if you want to win in that on-demand era. We're going to talk a bit about how on-demand is taking hold in Australia. Globally, it's been one of the fastest growing segments. Customers love immediacy, and immediacy, true immediacy, 1 to 2 hour experiences are only enabled through leveraging the store. And so learning how to use the store for fulfillment, how to use it for click and collect, how to place a locker in that location and be able to use that for an out-of-home pickup point. So stores play a critical role, and retailers who are truly omni figure out how to leverage the store well and the fulfillment center to do both in a competitive way.
Great, okay. Now, let's talk to brands, because a lot of brands are still trying to work out the right balance between direct-to-consumer, marketplaces, or a hybrid of both. So from what you're seeing globally, where is the real competitive advantage starting to emerge? And are there any brands you can think of getting that balance right?
Yeah. I think what's exciting for brands today is the number of channels that you have to be able to reach consumers and be able to drive your business. So the first thing that we always say is a brand needs to understand where their customer prefers to shop and ensure they've got a path to winning in that channel. And for most brands, Gary, that's multiple channels. So they likely have customers that want to find them on a marketplace, and so they've got to figure out how do they stand out and over-index in that marketplace. If they're big enough and trusted enough, they'll have their own app, their own channel, D2C, where they can serve customers and be great in that channel and giving the deepest experience with that brand. But increasingly, they've got to be great with social content. They've got to find in those content channels how they can really cut through and create compelling, interesting, engaging content so that customers, not only when they're shopping, but when they're leisuring, when they're learning, when they're seeking inspiration, those brands are showing up in that feed effectively. And so it's about getting your channel strategy right. It's understanding how I win in each channel, the role that each channel plays in my overall strategy. but then really understanding how content is the overlay to them all. We're going to talk a bit more about that because it's one area we think 2026 will really be emphasizing.
And I'm assuming that content is as important in the context you just described, but also for social commerce and I guess for AI, as AI emerges, right?
It is. It is. It is probably the fuel or the oil, if you will, of great commerce going forward. Content is how you really distinguish yourself, both with humans who are looking for, as I said, inspiration. Think about how much more time you, your kids, your friends have spent on content platforms in the last 2 years relative to the last 10. It's the fastest growing part of our life, good or bad, and that is where humans are being influenced and engaged. Meanwhile, LLMs are there as well. They're also leveraging that content to be able to learn and gain context. And so the better you are in content channels, the more likely you are to be understood and surfaced in an AI channel. And so the real flywheel going forward is being able to have what we call a content factory. As a retailer, as a brand, having an always-on content muscle that ensures you're continuously producing compelling content so that both humans are engaging with you, but LLMs are also learning about you every day.
And who would you say would be doing that really well around the globe right now?
Well, most tier one retailers are attacking both of these opportunities. I think Sephora still stands out as really being a pioneer and embracing content as a competitive advantage. And so when you look at Sephora in most of its markets, first, it over-indexes within the content platforms. It's wonderful on TikTok. It's great on Snap, on YouTube Shorts. But at the same time, it uses that content within its own app to be able to enrich its shopping experience. And what that's done in turn is as LLMs are scraping the Sephora app, they're walking away smarter and they're more likely to recommend Sephora when a prompt or when a customer's conversing on GPT or Gemini. And so I think Sephora has really been a pioneer and set the pace. But whether it be Walmart, Target in the US, many of your retailers here, content is becoming the competitive advantage when it comes to influencing consumers, whether it be on commerce platforms or just in their everyday life.
Right, okay. Now, changing course, you mentioned earlier lockers, and you were in the context of omni-channel, but lockers can be critical for pure play as well on a number of levels. But we're seeing rapid adoption globally, and it is different by market. But in the more mature locker markets outside Australia, what's really driving that uptake? Is it consumer behaviour, urban density? Is it retailer strategy, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's such an exciting topic because there are markets where lockers are so native to the e-commerce experience and then those where it's not. And the ingredients we see in those markets like Germany, like Poland, like China, where it's really become native, is A, you've got a major player that's willing to invest in building out a locker network. B, the biggest e-commerce players adopt out of home as one of their delivery propositions, and they incentivize customers towards that option by giving a lower free delivery threshold, usually, Gary, or some type of other incentive. Those two things over a prolonged period, usually a couple years, end up shaping consumer adoption for that out-of-home experience in such a positive way that then consumers demand it. They expect it to become an option, and so the rest of the industry ends up picking up. You're at that critical moment where it's unclear whether Australia is going to be a locker market or not. I think it's a great advantage to both e-commerce providers and consumers, and so I'm really optimistic and hopeful that with your investments and the industry's embrace, this becomes a convenient locker market.
Great, okay, well there's a challenge. Now, you and I were speaking to a customer last night about in-store fulfillment versus from a central location, and I think fulfillments can be treated as a bit of a back-end operational issue. And we know that retailers who want to compete with Amazon need to have world-class fulfillment. So how should a retailer be thinking about fulfillment infrastructure as part of their brand and customer experience rather than just a logistics thing?
The best retailers view fulfillment as an advantage. They view elite fulfillment as the goal, and they know if they can be better than their peers at fulfillment, they will win. And so what we've seen from Walmart to others around the world is a focus on fulfillment and treating it as important as the customer front-end experience, whether it be technology investment, talent investment, capital investment. Fulfillment has to be a priority, and particularly for omni-channel retailers, you've got to, as we talked about, Gary, develop two fulfillment muscles. You've got to be great at fulfillment center fulfillment, which is a pretty straightforward operation, but you've also got to be great at in-store fulfillment. You've got to teach, encourage, and inspire, incentivize your stores to embrace in-store fulfillment and make that an advantage, and that is challenging. But the best omni-channel retailers view it as an opportunity and make sure that they're as invested in that as they are their front-end proposition, and elite fulfillment ends up winning every time.
Now, one of the predictions from last year was around social commerce, which I think has played out. And whilst TikTok Shop hasn't arrived yet in Australia, there's no question that social commerce is growing, and I think back to content, as you said. But you know, there's also AI, and it's one thing you spoke a little bit about last year, but has just accelerated it's on a weekly basis almost. So I'd just love your perspective on the role AI plays for a retailer, and maybe back of house and front of house, and what's important to think about in the coming 12 months.
Yeah, what's become very clear is AI is going to transform two dimensions of being a retailer going forward. It's going to transform how you operate. You're going to buy differently, you're going to supply differently, you're going to market differently, and that whole opportunity we call co-intelligence. You're going to need to become co-intelligent as a retailer to keep up and lead. Meanwhile, co-consumption is what we call the change in consumer behavior, where AI is playing an increasing role in how consumers research, how they consider, how they convert. And so as a retailer, you've got to stay close to how your customer is embracing co-consumption and what that looks like. What's so exciting is that 70% of the impact of AI in retail so far has been on the co-intelligence side. It's adapting AI, inserting it into your process, and making your teams more effective. Look no further than Walmart in the US and the incredible impact they have had on their buying organizations and end-to-end teams, making them more effective by embracing AI. What we're seeing now in this moment is co-consumption starting to take center stage, because now we see in Australia, for instance, over 50% of consumers not just using AI to research while they're shopping. And so increasingly, Australian retailers, as well as retailers around the world, they're starting to learn, what is that experience going to look like as we go forward? The best approach we find to answering that question is creating optionality, is ensuring that whatever that looks like, whether that's consumers checking out on a ChatGPT or researching on GPT and using an app of yours inside GPT to check out, or being on your own platform and wanting an agentic experience there, making sure you've got your bases covered. You're learning what each of those experiences requires, and you're figuring out how do you win, because one of those ways forward is likely to be the dominant one, and you better not be left behind when that becomes commonplace.
So it sounds like optionality is what you're saying, to keep options open, to test and learn, and to continue to, it's moving at a rate of knots, so we don't have all the answers.
It is. On the consumer side, optionality is going to be worth more than everything. However, optionality requires work. It requires studying, learning, investing in figuring out each of these new ways consumers are behaving and making sure you're at the forefront, so that when it becomes mainstream and the default for customers going forward, you're not racing to catch up.
Right. Okay, now we've covered a lot of ground, so I have one final question, maybe a catch-all I could call it, but if you're advising an Australian retailer looking to build a genuine international edge in 2026, what are the one or perhaps two capabilities you'd prioritise first?
So first, I would recommend that they embrace what I call a best-in-world mindset. We started this conversation with the evolution from isolated to advanced, and realizing that you're no longer in a market where okay is good enough. The standard that Aussie consumers are expecting of you is now world-class. And so you as a retailer need to embrace that you've got to deliver a world-class experience. So first, I would embrace across the organization that we've got to step up and be able to be elite like many of our international peers in order to keep up, if not lead. Second, I would make sure that you are great at what we call the omni-channel muscles necessary to win as an omni-channel retailer. And that is a bit of a catch-all, but it really is how you show up in a uniquely omni-channel way in your digital channels, how you leverage your stores effectively to create advantage, how you get the organization behind the future of digital growth, including content-driven commerce, as well as the AIification of that consumer experience. You've got to have momentum across the organization, all teams, every individual committed to winning as an omni-channel retailer, and that takes a lot of effort, a lot of hustle, but it's an incredibly rewarding experience, and there's nothing like it when you can take on an international competitor and outperform them. That's where you know you're really achieving your potential.
Well, that sounds like a pretty fair challenge. I know from an Australia Post perspective, we're really doubling down on AI, and we are testing and learning. So we're using different LLMs, and we're encouraging our teams to test and learn. So really realising we just have to be part of it. We can't wait. Well, look, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground. It is a really exciting industry to be in and changing so rapidly. So again, we appreciate you coming out to Australia, sharing your global perspective, and lots to take away from the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
A reminder to send through your questions in the Q&A widget found in your webinar console, or you can scan the QR code on your screen. So I've got a great panel here to answer your questions. Let's get into the questions. Now, let's have a look at the first question here for Clementine. So the question is around the logistics you're using to deliver direct to D2C in the US. International post via AusPost is the question. Even your heavy items. So are consumers okay with the cost and lead time, and how does it compare to using a US 3PL partner instead?
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched in the US using our Australian warehouse. So we used our Australian warehouse international post with AusPost, and we did that for 12 months. We had a flat rate shipping for the US, so we sort of just found a middle ground of what we thought that would be, and we adjusted it as we learnt more, and the consumer was fine to pay for it. I think the biggest sticking point we had with the consumer expectation is in America, they expect things to arrive the same day or the next day, and so that was the sticking point. But we wanted to prove that we had a product market fit, so we stuck with that model for 12 months until the US was 50% of our business before we moved to a US warehouse. We're currently using a US warehouse. In all honesty, cost-wise, I wouldn't say it's much difference. The gap it fills is that the US customer gets their order a little bit quicker. We are actually about to test shipping a new product that we're launching through Zonos with AusPost back from our Australian warehouse, purely because you lose a lot of control in how that product lands with your consumer when using a US 3PL, and that's something that we've really struggled with.
Just a side question: is it really overt that you're an Australian brand to American consumers?
Absolutely.
Right, so they know. So with some of the other global marketplaces, there is an expectation around if it's in their local store, great, it's next day or same day. But if it's coming from China or from the UK, it could be 4 to 5 pages, and consumers seem to accept that. But there's no question that the big American marketplace in Amazon is setting an expectation of same day. So it's a reality from that customer experience. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so for both of you, for Alison and Clementine, is it best to expand? It's a similar question you've sort of answered with the USA warehouse. Do you need to set up a USA business for this, or get a USA partner? So I may throw to you first, Alison, and then come back to how you went about that.
Yeah, I mean, same scenario as Clementine. We started off with our Australian warehouse first, and we were assessing that market based on how that was performing before we moved into a US warehouse. As I mentioned earlier, we did have to expedite this as a result of the tariffs so that we can control that environment. And at the moment, the US warehouse is performing well for us. And I think the benefits of having a US warehouse as well is same. You can offer next day delivery, which you can't if you're operating from an Australian warehouse. And we're also able to offer exchanges. And for a fashion brand that has very tailored products, it's really beneficial for us to retain that revenue within the business and to, give our customers a better experience from that perspective.
Right. And what about for you, Clement? So you did set up, so you had 12 months, then you moved to that.
Yeah.
Did you have to set up a US entity? What was sort of the process?
Yeah, we did set up a US entity, and that was with a future lens, because with TikTok Shop, you need a US entity. So you can't set up under an Australian entity. So we did set up a US entity. We did that through an accountant and lawyer, and then we launched the US warehouse under that entity, and then we were able to use that warehouse as an address point for our TikTok Shop setup.
Right, okay. Now, Paul, there's a question just here about getting information on sending to the US. It just seems to change daily. I don't know if it changes daily, but it's certainly President Trump wakes up and decides he wants to change something, and it does seem to be pretty quick and unilateral. But certainly our website, the answer to the question initially is our website is the place to go. Or your account manager, or call our contact centre. But just more generally for information, you mentioned earlier, but just advise me, is there a contact point? Austrade, how do I get in touch, and where do I go?
Probably the best place, Gary, is to go onto the Go Global Toolkit, and that's a great resource, as I was saying earlier. Importantly, within Austrade, with all the disruption that's happening in the world, we're establishing a trade resilience service. So as a dedicated advisory service for business. So that's another point of contact. But if you go through the Go Global Toolkit in the first instance, that'll give you your entry point.
Fantastic.
Into finding other places for advice.
I know Paul and I were speaking earlier because we ran an event 4 or 5 years ago and had Austrade as like a little booth on the sidelines with a few hundred small business customers, and many said it's a bit of a black hole, and so having a trusted service that's a government service that can help me sort of decipher and get going on some of these more curly issues from a regulatory or a trade perspective, and certainly we can help when it comes to specifically the US and tariffs. As complex as it is, it's been demystified largely, but it can change. Okay, some more questions here. How does a small regional Australian business benefit from an online marketplace setup compared to big department stores like Kmart, Big W, etc.? So both of you as small businesses, I guess getting started, if you were you joined, part of it could have been in the US, well, I can go on Amazon or TikTok and I get eyeballs, but also with Amazon I get fulfillment and quick delivery. But in terms of your own brands in the Australian context, we've got a strong brand. The thought of being on a marketplace versus doing it yourselves, just thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we didn't go onto any marketplaces in Australia, and we've decided to stay off marketplaces in Australia. We are on Amazon in the US, though, and that decision for us, we had a really strong direct-to-consumer directly to our website. We didn't want to interfere with that. So that was a very personal choice. I didn't want to lose that customer. You don't own that customer when they go through a marketplace. So in those early stages, I wanted to really make sure that they were educated on our brand. They really were on board our brand and product. But then in the US, when you've got, I think it's 70% of the US market or 80% are a Prime member, there was an element of I felt I had to be there.
There's another wellness brand in Melbourne I met with recently that said exactly the same thing here. Yeah. Very strong brand, and they want to leverage their social, that they've got strong connection to their customers. But with 300 and whatever million eyeballs and as you say, that direct to consumer in the US, they felt, and it dilutes margins and they lose some control of the brand and that experience. It's the only way from such a distance to do it effectively.
Yeah.
Okay, and any sort of feedback from you on that question?
I mean, in terms of marketplaces, we're not on any of those traditional marketplaces, but we are stocked in some retailers. So in Australia, we're stocked in David Jones, and we have a couple of boutiques as well. And I think, yes, you are, essentially they're choosing between the retailers and your store to buy from, but I think there's also another lens to look at it, which is that they're driving brand awareness for you. And especially in the US, where in quite a lot of those big retailers like Bloomingdale's, Neiman Marcus, Revolve and Forward, and that's really driving more eyes to the site. they have their own stock position and we have ours. So if they sell out, they come to us directly. We have price parity with our wholesalers, so that's also very beneficial for us. But even, for example, last year we did one collaboration post with Anthropology, and that gained us 9,000 followers on TikTok for just that one post alone. Wow. So in that aspect, yes, you are essentially competing with them, but they're also doing wonders for your brand if you partner with them correctly.
Right, okay. Now, there's another question here, probably for Alison, I'll start with. So having a luxury brand, do you see it entering the re-commerce market, and have you thought about this? So re-commerce is in Europe and now in the US growing like crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely been conversations about that internally. There's platforms like Revibe where you can do rentals for luxury pieces, and I think there's definitely a space for it. It's something that we've been talking about. We're not sure where we've plotted that on the roadmap yet, but there's a specific buyer that goes to rental markets, and you either play that part in that role or you stick to your own guns. So yeah, I think we've definitely discussed that, but on the roadmap.
Okay, great. Now, I noticed we've only got like just 30 seconds left, so maybe, Clementine, last question for you, just others could answer, but in time. You also noted a growing focus on, are there any other emerging markets you'd go after? So clearly US, you said now, is a big chunk of your business.
Yeah.
And does it come down to the demographic or how they approach wellness, or what are the considerations?
I mean, for us, it was just the traction we saw when we launched a global marketing campaign on Meta. So it was really just where we saw the traction immediately. I think some other emerging markets that we're really seeing is Singapore, Hong Kong, UAE. Obviously, UAE has taken a bit of a hit this year, so we've had to pull back from there. And then Europe, naturally, as a wellness hub, I think there's just so much opportunity there. Europe, we sort of held off because crossing border there was always a lot more difficult than it was to the US with the taxes, duties, etc. So we went with the US. Now they're pretty comparative, so it may be one that we open
And things may change with it's hard to know how it will play, as you mentioned earlier. Okay, look, we are out of time, so thank you so much for joining us. As we wrap up, for the people joining us today, I hope you're walking away with greater clarity and confidence about what it takes to grow internationally in today's environment. It is complex in the global environment, and we do think the opportunity for Australian businesses remains incredibly strong with the right strategy, the right insights, hopefully you've taken some from today, and the right support. Here at Australia Post, we're here to support you on that journey. Many of you know we have a dedicated team of international experts who work with businesses every day to help cut through the noise, whether that's navigating new markets, as we talked about, understanding logistics, or scaling your operations globally. If you'd like to learn more, I'd encourage you to speak with your Australia Post account manager or follow the link on your screen, fill out their inquiry form, and our team will be in touch. And of course, Austrade is here to help as well, as you've heard from Paul. So thank you again for joining us for Business Talks, Going Global. We appreciate your time and we look forward to supporting your continued growth.